Greetings, loyal subjects. Today I take you on an inside tour of one of the most significant sites in English history. A place where Henry V received his great insult from the French that resulted in the Battle of Agincourt. A place where a courtier attempted to woo a queen. Today we visit Kenilworth Castle. Kenilworth Castle's story begins when Henry I granted lands to Geoffrey de Clinton in 1124, and it was here that Clinton built a simple earth motte crowned with timber buildings. But shortly afterwards he began construction on what is now known as the Great Tower, what you might commonly call the Castle Keep. Henry II took the castle into royal control during the time of the Great Rebellion by his sons in 1173. Two of those sons were later to sit on the throne. The second of these sons, the much maligned King John, spent over £1,000 on improving the defensive structures at the castle. He built the outer Bailey stone walls that are still standing, together with a series of defensive towers. The best example is probably Lund's Tower, shown here. On the ground floor there were 5 fish-tailed arrow loops, and the first and second floors were used as chambers, as could be seen by the open fireplace. King John also made improvements to the dam and the defensive water structures of the castle. This is actually the top of the old dam here. It is the main entrance now into the castle from the ticket office. To the left there would have been a huge expanse of water called the Mere. It would have filled this entire area in front of the castle that you see before you. Roger Mortimer hosted a tournament here in 1279, and the jousts were actually run across the top of the dam. By the time of the Tudor era, this area had simply become known as the Tilt Yard. In front of us is the original medieval entrance to the castle, known as Mortimer's Tower. 2 D-shaped towers would have been separated by a portcullis. They would have been at least 1 story higher and included battlements. The arrow slits, as you can see, give an excellent view over the Mere to help protect against attack from the water. In 1244 the castle was given to Simon de Montfort, Earl of Leicester. However, by 1258 he was the leader of a rebellion against Henry III. This ultimately resulted in his death at the Battle of Evesham in 1265. However, his followers weren't yet ready to give up the fight, and they made a final stand at Kenilworth Castle. In 1266 the king's messenger returned minus a hand. Henry III wasn't prepared to wait any longer, and on the 25th of June he launched an all-out siege against the castle. It would turn into the longest castle siege on English soil. The king brought up a trebuchet from London to assist in the siege. Archaeologists have found 300-pound missiles fired by this device in this outer Bailey area. However, such was the defensive structure and the clever placement of the water defences that the king was forced to grant the inhabitants favourable terms, and they eventually surrendered on these terms just prior to Christmas. In 1362 the castle became the possession of John of Gaunt, the fourth son of Edward III. He became the most powerful man in the kingdom following the premature deaths of his elder brothers. He built royal apartments and also his crowning glory, the Great Hall. Such was the nature of this Great Hall that when Robert Dudley, Earl of Leicester, acquired the castle during the reign of Elizabeth, this was one element that he refused to touch. We are now entering the Great Hall. We're actually in the cellars underneath. Wood rots over time, and the original falls have now disintegrated. It's a 6-bay structure with deep set windows, and it was here that the vast majority of the entertaining of the castle would have taken place. You can still see the fireplaces and the stone seating around the windows. The kitchens were obviously close to the Great Hall for ease of serving. These were 66 feet in length, which was pretty remarkable for medieval times. On the far wall there you see the remains of a number of the hearths that we used for the cooking. In front of us now is what is known as the Strong Tower. On the first floor up those stairs would have been the buttery and the passageway to the Great Hall, and one floor further up would have been the bedchamber of Robert Dudley's wife Amy. We're now entering into the cellars. These almost have a dungeon feel about them. But no, these cellars were never used as dungeons. This was simply the main storage area for the castle. So this would have been the larder for the kitchens, where the vast majority of the food stuff would have been kept before it was used. Remember, the kitchens had to cook a phenomenal amount of food. These castles were staffed by hundreds of people. Both the Lancastrian kings Henry IV and his son Henry V extensively used Kenilworth Castle, and Henry V was actually here when he received his infamous gift from the French ambassador of tennis balls. The French ambassador was later to say that he had sent little balls for the King of England to play with and soft pillows for which to help him to sleep. The implication was that Henry was far too young to engage in the complex political negotiations that were going on. The king was 30. Henry took this as a great slight, and he invaded France. He ultimately won victory on St. Crispin's Day, 25th of October 1415, at the Battle of Agincourt. Maybe the gift of tennis balls wasn't such a good idea. Henry also built a pleasance at the far end of the mere, which by this stage was over half a mile long. It was essentially a pleasure site. My own father built a tennis court at the site. My own relationship with the castle was limited. I visited here on a number of occasions, but that was about as far as it went. The castle was granted to John Dudley, Duke of Northumberland, in 1553. It was he that constructed the impressive Tudor-era stables. If you do visit the site, then you must go and see inside. It is now a tea room, but the open roof is not to be missed. Dudley, of course, made a rather sticky end for himself when he masterminded Lady Jane Grey's coup against my daughter Mary. When Elizabeth I came to the throne, she granted the castle to her favourite, Dudley's son, Robert, who soon became the Earl of Leicester. And Elizabeth I visited the castle on no less than 4 occasions, in 1566, 68, 72, and finally for the grand visit in 1575. Dudley undertook vast building works. Firstly, there was the gatehouse that you just saw, and this, what has become known as Leicester's Building. It was essentially built purely to house Elizabeth and her principal servants. She stayed here in both 1572 and, after further improvements were made, for the 19-day visit in 1575. This 1575 visit was the longest period that Elizabeth spent in any courtier's house on any of her royal progresses during her reign. Of course, the relationship between Elizabeth and Robert Dudley has long been debated. There was certainly a strong attraction between the two, and it is often said that Robert Dudley would probably have been the only man Elizabeth would have considered marrying. There was, of course, a principal problem. Dudley was already married. His wife Amy met a rather suspicious end after being found alone in her house at the bottom of a set of stairs with a broken neck. There was huge concern throughout the kingdom, and Elizabeth immediately ordered the banishment of Dudley from court. However, the investigation cleared him, rightly or wrongly, and he was soon invited back. However, all talk of marriage ended. However, after Elizabeth's death, one of the principal documents in her own private casket was Robert Dudley's final letter to her, and she'd inscribed on it his last letter. During the English Civil War, it was initially a royalist stronghold. However, it got captured by the parliamentarian forces and was held by them until the end of the war. Parliament wanted to ensure that former royalist strongholds would no longer be a threat, and in 1649 orders came down that the castle at Kenilworth was to be slighted. In other words, it was to be destroyed so that it could no longer be successfully used as a defensive structure. Over the course of a few short months, hundreds of years of power and might were erased as the fortifications were removed, brick by brick. I hope you enjoy this video. Please subscribe and check out the rest of my content. I look forward to seeing you all again.